The most dangerous mistake a person can make is thinking they already know the man sitting across from them. My wife made that mistake, and on the morning she handed me an 11-page legal document designed to protect her from me, she had no idea that I had already spent 17 months preparing for the day she would finally discover who she had married. My name is Ethan Mercer, and I had been underestimated by the woman I loved. Not because I was weak, because I let her believe I was. It was Monday morning in our home, overlooking the San Francisco Bay. I was sitting at the kitchen table in an old gray shirt, drinking coffee and staring through the window when my wife, Vanessa, walked in wearing the armor I had come to recognize so well. Black blazer, heels, perfect hair, that controlled expression she wore whenever she was about to make a decision that would affect other people's lives. She placed a thick cream-colored envelope beside my coffee. She didn't sit down. "My attorney prepared something for you," Vanessa said. I looked at the envelope. Her law firm's name was printed across the front. I already knew this wasn't a bill. "What is it?" I asked. She picked up her phone and began scrolling. A postnuptial agreement. For a moment, I didn't respond. We had been married for almost 3 years. "Why now?" She finally looked at me. Her smile was polite. Cold. "We've both built lives before this marriage, Ethan. I think it's important that we protect what belongs to each of us." What belonged to each of us? Those words hurt more than I expected, because I had never thought of our marriage that way. I had thought of it as ours. Vanessa pushed the envelope closer. "Read it carefully. My attorneys can answer any questions." Then she picked up her handbag. I watched her walk toward the door. She didn't kiss me goodbye. She hadn't kissed me goodbye in nearly 8 months. I had noticed. I had simply pretended not to. The door closed, and suddenly the kitchen felt enormous. I opened the envelope. 11 pages. Her signature was already waiting near the bottom. I began reading. House, savings, investments, business interests. Everything was carefully defined. Then I reached the section describing my assets. I stopped. It said my financial holdings were limited and largely unverified. I read that sentence twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because Vanessa had no idea how wrong she was. She believed I was a quiet former consultant with a comfortable home and a modest investment portfolio. She believed I was harmless, ordinary, predictable. But 3 years before Vanessa met me, I had sold the technology company I built from nothing. The sale had made me wealthy enough that I never needed to work again. I simply chose not to advertise it. No interviews, no magazine articles, no flashy cars, no social media posts showing strangers how much money I had. Vanessa thought my silence meant I had nothing to hide. She was wrong. My silence was the hiding place. But the money wasn't what hurt. The real betrayal came months earlier, when I discovered a file on our shared computer. A file Vanessa never intended me to see. Its name was simple. 5-Year Exit Strategy. I still remember sitting there alone, staring at that title. Because inside that folder was a plan for ending our marriage. And beside the plan was something far worse. A name. A man I had shaken hands with at Vanessa's company dinners. A man who always called me friend. A man who apparently knew exactly what my wife intended to do to me. That night, I realized something that broke my heart in a way money never could. Vanessa hadn't married me despite believing I was ordinary. She had married me because she believed I was ordinary. I wasn't her husband in the plan she had created. I was an asset. A shield. A convenient man who made her life look stable. And somehow, that hurt more than knowing she wanted to leave. Because I had loved her. For a while, I even wondered if the woman I fell in love with had ever truly existed. But I didn't confront her. I didn't throw the file across the kitchen. I didn't demand answers. I did something far more difficult. I stayed quiet. I made dinner. I asked about her day. I smiled when she expected me to smile. And while Vanessa believed our marriage was moving exactly according to her 5-year plan, I quietly began creating one of my own. And mine had only one rule. She could never know I was playing, because the next move wouldn't come from her. It would come from me. And when Vanessa finally discovered what I had been building behind her back, she wouldn't just lose control of our marriage. She would discover that the quiet husband she had spent years underestimating had been standing much closer to her empire than she ever imagined. Before Vanessa became my wife, before the legal documents and hidden plans, there was a night when I honestly believed I had found someone different. Looking back now, that memory hurts more than I expected. It was a Thursday evening in early 2021, when I first saw her at a private business reception in San Francisco. I hadn't wanted to go. My old friend Marcus Reed had practically dragged me there. "You've been hiding in that apartment for too long," he'd told me. "You need to meet people." I meet people. Delivery drivers don't count, Ethan. So I went. Navy jacket. No tie. No expensive watch. Nothing that suggested I had more money than I needed. My plan was simple. Stay for 40 minutes. Shake a few hands. Pretend to care about conversations involving quarterly projections. Then go home. I was standing near the back of the room with a glass of sparkling water when Vanessa appeared beside me. "You know you're supposed to talk to people at these things, right?" I turned. She was wearing a black dress. Simple. Elegant. And she had the kind of smile that made you feel as if she'd already figured something out about you. I glanced around the crowded room. "Are you talking to people?" She laughed. A real laugh. At least, I thought it was real. "Vanessa Cole. Ethan Mercer. What do you do?" There it was. The question I'd heard 100 times at events like this. I had learned years earlier that telling people the truth about my finances usually changed the conversation. People became interested too quickly, so I gave them the boring version. Consulting. Mostly retired. Mostly? I invest a little. She studied me. Most people would have moved on. Vanessa didn't. We talked for nearly 2 hours. She told me she was the CEO of a growing logistics company called Northstar Freight Systems. She was ambitious, intelligent, funny in a quiet, sharp way, and she had this habit of listening without looking at her phone. That night, I liked her. More than I should have. What Vanessa didn't know was that I wasn't really a consultant. For years before that reception, I had built a supply chain software company from the ground up. 9 years of my life had gone into it. Long nights. Failed prototypes. Investors who told me it would never work. Employees who eventually believed in it. Then a private investment group purchased the company. The final amount was enough to change my life permanently. But I didn't celebrate publicly. I didn't buy a supercar. I didn't announce my wealth online. I went home, ordered takeout, and watched an old documentary. That was my version of success. Money that needs to be displayed isn't always security. Sometimes it's an invitation. So I stayed quiet. By the time I met Vanessa, I had investments spread across several businesses and property holdings in different countries. But she knew none of that. To her, I was simply Ethan, the quiet man with a nice apartment, modest clothes, and no interest in showing off. And strangely enough, that seemed to make her more interested. We dated for almost a year. Vanessa brought me to company dinners and investor gatherings. She would introduce me with a smile. "This is Ethan, my partner." At first, I thought she was proud of me. Then Marcus said something that I ignored. We were standing outside one of Vanessa's corporate events when he pulled me aside. "Have you noticed how she introduces you?" I laughed. "What does that mean?" Marcus lowered his voice. "She talks about her company like it's the greatest thing she's ever created. Then she introduces you like you're an accessory." I shook my head. "She's proud of me." Marcus stared at me. "She's warmer when she talks about her quarterly numbers." That should have bothered me. Instead, I made a joke. Because when you love someone, you become strangely talented at explaining away things that would be obvious to anyone else. A few months later, Vanessa suggested a small wedding. Nothing extravagant. Just close friends and family. We married in the spring of 2022. There were fewer than 30 people there. The morning was cold, and fog hung over the city. Vanessa looked beautiful. I remember watching her walk toward me, and thinking one ridiculous thing. Maybe this was finally real. The first year of our marriage was genuinely good. Or at least, I believed it was. Then something changed. It wasn't dramatic. There wasn't one huge argument. No screaming. No obvious betrayal. Just small things. Longer nights at the office. Fewer conversations. More meetings. More phone calls she took in another room. And eventually, Vanessa stopped treating our marriage like a relationship and started treating it like an arrangement. I didn't understand why. Not yet. Then, one ordinary evening, I was searching through our shared computer for an insurance document. I opened an old folder and found a file that made my hands go cold. Its title was 5-Year Exit Strategy. I stared at those words for several seconds. Then I opened it. The first page contained financial projections. The second contained timelines. The third contained information about our marriage. I kept scrolling. Year 2. Year 3. Year 4. Year 5. It wasn't a romantic future plan. It was an exit strategy. My exit. And then I saw something that made my stomach tighten. A name. Grant Holloway. A senior executive at Northstar. A man Vanessa had introduced to me more than once. A man who had smiled, shaken my hand, and called me buddy. He wasn't just mentioned in the document. He appeared to be part of the plan. I leaned back from the computer. The room suddenly felt too quiet. I read the file again. Then again. And slowly, painfully, I understood the truth. Vanessa hadn't accidentally married a quiet man. She had selected one. She believed I was financially insignificant. She believed I was predictable. She believed I would never look closely enough to discover what she was doing. And worst of all, she believed I loved her too much to fight back. She was right about one thing. I did love her. That was the part that destroyed me. I sat alone in the kitchen that night, staring at that screen, remembering the first time she laughed beside me at that reception. I wanted to believe that woman had been real. I wanted to believe our wedding had meant something. I wanted to believe the nights we'd spent talking had been about two people building a life together. But the document was sitting in front of me, and documents don't care what you want to believe. I closed the laptop. I didn't confront Vanessa. Instead, I walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and started making dinner. Because if Vanessa had spent years building a secret plan around me, then I needed to know exactly how far that plan went. And before I confronted her, I needed to find out one thing. Who was really standing behind her? Because Grant Holloway's name wasn't the biggest secret inside that file. It was only the first one I'd discovered. That night, Vanessa came home at 8:36. I knew the exact time because I had been sitting in the dark for almost an hour, waiting to hear the front door. The laptop was closed. The document was gone from the screen. And the man she thought she had married was back in his usual place. Quiet. Calm. Predictable. Vanessa walked into the kitchen and stopped. Something smells good. I turned from the stove. Chicken pasta. She dropped her handbag onto a chair. Long day. Bad one. She sighed and started telling me about her company. A difficult client. A board member asking questions. A supplier who wasn't meeting deadlines. I listened. I asked the right questions. I even laughed at the right moments. She had no idea that while she talked about her business, I was thinking about the document with her 5-year plan. And one name kept returning to my mind. Grant Holloway. When dinner ended, Vanessa kissed my cheek. It was brief. Almost automatic. Then she went upstairs. I stayed behind. I washed the plates slowly. Not because they needed washing. Because I needed time. I had spent years learning that the worst decisions are usually made while you're angry. And I was angry. God, I was angry. But underneath that anger was something much worse. Grief. I had looked at the woman sleeping upstairs and realized I might never have known her at all. That thought nearly broke me. I wanted to wake her. I wanted to put the laptop in front of her and ask why. I wanted her to look me in the eyes and tell me that the entire thing was some misunderstanding. But I knew what would happen. She would deny it. Then she'd investigate. And the moment Vanessa realized I knew, the game would change. So I made a decision. I would give her nothing. No suspicious questions. No change in routine. No sudden distance. Nothing. If she wanted to believe I was harmless, I would let her believe it. Because I had something Vanessa didn't. Time. The next morning, I called the only person I trusted with the truth. His name was Daniel Cross. Daniel had been my attorney since the early days of my first company. He knew exactly what I had built. He knew what I had sold. And more importantly, he knew how patient I could be when something mattered. He answered on the second ring. Ethan? I need you in the city. A pause. How serious? I looked through the kitchen window. Vanessa was already leaving for work. She didn't look back. Serious enough that I don't want to discuss it over the phone. I'll be there tomorrow. When Daniel arrived, I told him everything. The document. The timeline. Grant Holloway. The financial assumptions Vanessa had made about me. He listened without interrupting. That alone told me how serious he thought it was. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. How long have you known? Since yesterday. Daniel's expression changed. Then why haven't you confronted her? Because I don't want her to know. Know what? I slid a sheet of paper across the desk. He picked it up. His eyes moved down the page. Then stopped. What is this? Northstar Freight. He looked at me. You're considering buying into your wife's company? Not considering. Daniel stared at me. You already did? Not yet. A slow smile appeared on his face. That was the moment I knew he understood. Vanessa had built her plan around the belief that I was financially small. So I wasn't going to attack her marriage. I was going to enter the world she cared about most. Her company, her investors, her contracts, her carefully protected empire. But I wanted to do it without Vanessa seeing me coming. Daniel pulled a notebook toward himself. How much? I gave him the number. His eyebrows rose. That's enough to make people nervous. Then don't make anyone nervous. He stared at me for another second. You really want to do this? I thought about the woman I had married. The woman I had loved. The woman who had apparently calculated exactly when our marriage should end. No, I said quietly. Daniel waited. I wanted a wife. I wanted a home. I wanted to grow old beside someone who actually knew me. My voice almost cracked. I looked away before he could see it. But I can't force someone to love me. Daniel said nothing. That silence hurt more than advice would have. Finally, I looked back at him. Build me something she won't recognize. The following week, Daniel created a new holding company. We called it Blackridge Holdings. The name was intentionally dull. No connection to me. No connection to my known investments. No reason for anyone at Northstar to care. Then we started moving. Not recklessly. Not loudly. Small positions. Separate transactions. Different intermediaries. Different paperwork. And slowly, Blackridge began acquiring a meaningful stake in Northstar's business network. Not enough to attract attention. Just enough to put me somewhere Vanessa never expected to find me. Across the table. Behind the curtain. Inside the system she thought belonged entirely to her. The strangest part was what happened at home. Vanessa became warmer. She started calling me my favorite person. She cooked dinner one Friday night. She asked about my week. She even reached across the table and touched my hand. For a second, I almost forgot everything. Almost. Because some stupid part of me still wanted her love to be real. And that was the cruelest battle of all. Not defeating Vanessa. Not protecting my money. Not planning revenge. It was convincing myself to stop hoping she would suddenly become the woman I thought I married. One night, after Vanessa went upstairs, I sat alone in the kitchen. Her untouched wine glass was still on the table. I stared at it for a long time. Then I whispered to myself, let her believe she's winning. Because the next phase had already begun. And Vanessa still had no idea that the company she was working so hard to protect was slowly becoming connected to the husband she believed owned almost nothing. But Blackridge wasn't my most dangerous move. Because Daniel had just discovered something about Grant Holloway. And when he told me who Grant was secretly doing business with, I realized Vanessa's 5-year plan was much bigger than our marriage. Daniel called me on a Thursday morning. He didn't say hello. That alone told me something was wrong. Grant Holloway, he said. I stopped stirring my coffee. What about him? He's running a private investment fund on the side. I leaned against the kitchen counter. How big? Small enough that nobody important talks about it. Big enough that somebody is trying very hard to make it bigger. I looked toward the hallway. Vanessa was upstairs getting ready for work. Who? Daniel hesitated. That's the interesting part. I waited. He's looking for an anchor investor. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. How much? About $2.4 million. I stared through the window. $2.4 million wasn't the important part. The important part was that Grant Holloway was the man Vanessa had placed inside her private 5-year plan. A man she trusted. A man who knew something about the future of our marriage. And now he was searching for someone to finance his own investment operation. I looked down at my coffee. Can we become that investor? Daniel went silent. Then he laughed. You want to invest in the fund belonging to the man your wife may be planning to involve in your divorce? I want to know what he's building. There's a difference. I know. Daniel sighed. There's another difference. If you do this, you can't make it obvious. It won't be. How many layers? I thought about Grant calling me buddy at company dinners. About his casual smile. About Vanessa sitting across from me at our dining table while quietly planning the end of our marriage. 3. Daniel immediately said, 4. I almost smiled. You're getting paranoid. No. I'm getting paid to keep you from being stupid. 4 layers. Now we're talking. That afternoon, Blackridge moved. The investment was divided across multiple entities and intermediaries. No single transaction pointed toward me. No obvious connection. No reason for Grant to look in my direction. And then it happened. A few weeks later, Daniel called. You're in. I sat quietly. Grant knows. Grant knows the fund has a new limited partner. Does he know me? No. Good. Daniel paused. There's something else. I waited. Two of Northstar's largest logistics suppliers are having cash flow problems. I frowned. How bad? Bad enough that they're looking for outside capital. I understood immediately. How much control? Not much. But if you take positions in both, you'll have a seat at the table when their contracts come up. I looked at the wall. Vanessa talked about those suppliers constantly. The Phoenix carrier. The New Jersey distributor. I had listened to her complain about them over dinner more times than I could remember. I had heard her frustration, her deadlines, her concerns about margins, and now those same companies were looking for money. Buy in, I said. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Ethan, if this works, you could end up sitting across from Northstar during negotiations. Exactly. And Vanessa won't know. That's the point. The purchases happened quietly. No press. No announcement. No dramatic move. Just paperwork. Numbers. Signatures. And suddenly, Vanessa's company was negotiating with businesses whose capital was connected to me. She had no idea. That evening, she came home smiling. Good news, she said. I looked up from the book in my hand. What's happening? Northstar's numbers are stronger than expected. I smiled. That's good. She walked over and kissed my cheek. Then she poured herself a glass of wine. You know, Ethan, sometimes I think you're the only person in my life who doesn't want something from me. The words hit harder than she could possibly know. I looked at her. She was smiling, completely sincere. And for one horrible second, I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to say, I don't want your company. I don't want your money. I don't want revenge. I wanted you. I wanted the woman from that first night. The woman who laughed with me for 2 hours. The woman who made me believe I had finally found someone who cared about the man beneath the money. But I swallowed every word. How was your meeting? I asked. She started talking. I listened. And later that night, when she fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling. I wondered how many times a person could break your heart without even realizing they were doing it. Because the strategy was working. Blackridge was growing. Grant's fund was now connected to me. Two of Northstar's major suppliers were connected to me. Vanessa's company was becoming surrounded by pieces she didn't know I controlled. But revenge didn't feel the way I had imagined. It felt empty. Because every victory reminded me of what I had lost. One rainy night, I sat alone in the kitchen with a glass of whiskey. I didn't drink it. I just watched the amber liquid move when I tilted the glass. Upstairs, Vanessa was asleep. I thought about our wedding. The first dinner we cooked together. The mornings when she'd rested her head against my shoulder. All those memories suddenly felt contaminated. I whispered, was any of it real? There was no answer. I poured the whiskey down the sink. Then I washed the glass and went upstairs. The next morning, I went back to work. Because wanting your past to be different doesn't change what happened. But there was one thing I still didn't know. Why was Grant Holloway in Vanessa's exit strategy? And Daniel was about to uncover the answer. Because the next piece of information he found wasn't about Grant's fund. It was about Vanessa herself. And when I learned what she had been preparing for years before she ever met me, I finally understood why she had chosen me in the first place. By the beginning of the following year, Vanessa was having the best quarter of her career. That was the irony. She believed everything was finally falling into place. Northstar's numbers were strong. Her investors were satisfied. The board had stopped questioning her decisions. And at home, her marriage looked stable. Exactly what Vanessa wanted. Exactly what I needed her to believe. I had become very good at pretending nothing had changed. I still asked about her meetings. I still listened when she complained about suppliers. I still remembered the little things she liked. If she wanted dinner, I made dinner. If she wanted to talk, I listened. If she wanted to believe I was the same quiet husband she'd married, I gave her that comfort. But behind the scenes, the picture was completely different. Blackridge Holdings now had a 13% position connected to Northstar's business interests. The two struggling suppliers had received capital from entities tied to me. And Grant Holloway's private fund had accepted my money without ever learning my identity. Grant still saw me as Vanessa's quiet husband. Sometimes I wondered how long that illusion could survive. Then Daniel called. It was early on a Tuesday morning. Ethan. His voice was different. What happened? Nothing happened yet. I sat down. Then why do you sound like that? Because I found something you need to see. My stomach tightened. Send it. I'd rather show you. 20 minutes later, Daniel walked into my office carrying a thin folder. He put it on the desk. I didn't touch it. What is it? Documentation connected to Vanessa's investment history. I looked at him. Why are you showing me this? Because I think you misunderstood something. That sentence bothered me. I opened the folder. The first pages contained old investment records, company filings, private correspondence, investor communications. Then I reached a section dated years before Vanessa and I had ever met. I stopped. What am I looking at? Daniel pointed to a series of transactions. Before she met you, Vanessa was already under pressure from several investors. I kept reading. Her lifestyle, her company expansion, her personal financial exposure. There were concerns about how quickly Northstar was growing. Concerns about her spending. Concerns about whether she was financially stable enough to remain the public face of the company. Then I found something that made my chest tighten. A note about the kind of spouse that would help her image. Someone stable, low profile, financially quiet, someone who wouldn't attract attention. I stared at the page. Daniel watched me carefully. She wasn't looking for a husband, I said. He didn't answer. She was looking for cover. That's what the documents suggest. I closed my eyes. For months, I'd been telling myself that Vanessa had fallen in love with me and later betrayed me. That version had been painful. This was worse, because now I had to question the beginning itself. The first conversation, the black dress, her laughter, the way she'd looked at me. Maybe she'd been studying me from the first minute. Maybe I hadn't been lucky that night. Maybe I'd been selected. I leaned back. How did she know I had money? Daniel shook his head. That's the strange part. She didn't. I looked at him. Not initially. He tapped another page. She believed what she saw. A quiet consultant. Comfortable home. No public financial footprint. No obvious business ties. I stared at the documents. Then something inside me went completely still. She hadn't discovered my wealth. She had discovered my invisibility. And she had mistaken it for weakness. Daniel sat down. Ethan, there's another issue. I looked up. Grant. My jaw tightened. What about him? He wasn't originally part of the plan because of some romantic connection. Then why? Daniel slid another document toward me. Investment structure. I read the page. Grant had been helping move money between several private interests. Some of those interests overlapped with Northstar. Not directly. Not enough to immediately expose anything. But enough to create a pattern. Vanessa wasn't simply preparing for a divorce. She was preparing to separate herself financially from the risks surrounding her company. And I had been chosen as the perfect person to stand beside her while she did it. A husband with a clean public profile. A quiet lifestyle. Minimal visible assets. No reason for investors to worry. I felt something wet against my cheek. I hadn't even realized I'd started crying. I wiped it away quickly. Daniel didn't comment. That was one reason I trusted him. He let me have the moment. I looked down at the wedding ring on my finger. Almost 3 years. I remembered putting it on Vanessa's hand. I remembered promising her that I'd stay. And suddenly I understood the cruelest part. I had meant every word. She hadn't. At least, not in the way I had. I stood and walked toward the window. The city was moving below me. Cars. People. Businesses. Everyone living ordinary lives while mine had quietly turned into a war. I want to stop, I said. Daniel frowned. Stop what? Everything. He was silent. I turned toward him. Sell the positions. Walk away from Northstar. Forget Grant. Let her have everything. Daniel studied me. Do you really want that? I didn't know. That was the honest answer. I wanted peace. But I also wanted Vanessa to understand what she'd done. Not because I wanted to destroy her. Because I wanted her to finally see me. The man she had dismissed. The husband she had reduced to a line on a financial document. The person whose heart she had treated like another asset to be managed. Then Daniel said something that changed my mind. Ethan, if you walk away now, she still believes her plan worked. I looked at him, and he continued. She'll never understand what she underestimated. I looked down at the folder again. Then I slowly closed it. Don't sell anything. Daniel nodded. What's next? I thought about Vanessa's 5-year timeline. She had planned her ending years in advance. So I decided to give her exactly what she expected. A quiet husband. A predictable marriage. A man who never noticed anything. Until the day she finally opened the door and discovered that the world she'd carefully built around herself was no longer hers alone. And that day was getting closer. Because Daniel had just calculated something I hadn't considered. If everything continued at the current pace, Blackridge would soon have enough influence to change Northstar's board without Vanessa's permission. And I wasn't going to wait for year 5. I was going to make my move early. But before I could do that, Vanessa made a decision of her own. She came home one evening, placed her phone on the table, looked directly at me, and said something I never expected to hear. "Ethan, I think we should finally talk about our future." She had no idea. I had been waiting for those words. And this time, I was ready. "Ethan, I think we should finally talk about our future." Vanessa said it casually, almost gently. But I knew that tone. She had already made the decision. She just wanted me to believe we were discussing it together. I put my fork down. "What kind of future?" She looked at me for a moment. Then she reached into her handbag and pulled out a thin folder. My heart sank. Not because I was surprised, because I had seen this coming for months. "The agreement," she said. "I think we should finalize everything." I looked at the folder, then at her. "You mean the postnuptial agreement?" Vanessa nodded. "I've had my attorneys make a few adjustments." A few adjustments. That was how she described it, as if she were updating a business contract. I opened the folder. The language was even more carefully written than the first version. She had strengthened protections around her company, her investments, her properties, her personal accounts. And once again, my assets were treated as if there were almost nothing worth discussing. I read silently. Vanessa watched me, waiting for resistance, waiting for questions, waiting for the version of Ethan she understood. Instead, I signed. Her eyebrows lifted. "That's it." I placed the pen down. "You wanted me to sign." She studied my face. "You're not going to have your attorney review it?" "I trust your lawyers." That was almost enough to make me laugh. Almost. She picked up the document. For a second, she looked genuinely confused. Then her expression softened. "Thank you." I nodded. She leaned over and kissed me. For the first time in months, the kiss lasted more than a second. And that hurt more than if she had walked away. Because I knew exactly what she was thinking. She believed she had protected herself. She believed she had won. She believed the quiet man sitting across from her had just signed away any leverage he might have had. She had no idea that the document she had just made me sign was going to become the strongest evidence of her own mistake. The next morning, I called Daniel. "She signed it." "Good. Now prepare everything." He went silent. "Everything." "Everything." Over the next several weeks, Daniel and I assembled the final package. Blackridge, the supplier investments, Grant Holloway's fund, the connections between them, every transaction, every layer, every piece of ownership. We documented it all. Nothing was hidden illegally. Nothing was fabricated. We simply connected the dots Vanessa had never bothered to look for. Then we waited. I had learned something about revenge. The best moment isn't when you have the weapon. It's when the other person is completely certain they are safe. Vanessa was certain. Her company had just reported another strong quarter. Her investors were happy. Her board was satisfied. And our marriage, from the outside, looked perfectly normal. She had no reason to suspect anything. Then Daniel called me one afternoon. "Ethan, it's ready." I looked at the folder sitting on my desk. "How many pages?" 43. I remembered the 11 pages Vanessa had given me that first morning. 11 pages telling me what she believed I owned. 43 pages showing her what I actually controlled. I almost smiled. "Send it." The documents went to Vanessa's attorney. Not Vanessa. Her attorney. I wanted a professional to read it first. I wanted someone trained to understand financial structures to be the person who realized just how badly Vanessa had miscalculated. The response came less than 2 hours later. Her attorney, Richard Sloan, requested an immediate call with Daniel. The call lasted less than 10 minutes. Daniel told me afterward that Richard's voice had changed halfway through the conversation. At first, he had sounded confident, then cautious, then extremely careful. Finally, he asked one question. "How much of this belongs to Mr. Mercer?" Daniel answered, "Enough." Richard apparently went silent. Then he said something Daniel remembered word for word. "We need to revisit the agreement." Daniel looked at me when he told me. I shook my head. "No, that's what I told him. Every term stays exactly as Vanessa wrote it." Daniel smiled. "That's going to hurt." "It isn't supposed to hurt." He looked at me. I corrected myself. "Not anymore." I wasn't angry now. That surprised me. For nearly 2 years, I had imagined the moment Vanessa discovered the truth. I had imagined satisfaction, maybe even triumph. Instead, I felt tired, Because I finally understood something. I hadn't spent all those months trying to defeat Vanessa. I had been trying to survive the moment when I accepted that she wasn't the person I thought she was. And now that moment had arrived. 3 days later, Vanessa came home early. That had never happened. She usually stayed at the office until evening. But that afternoon, I opened the front door and found her sitting alone at the kitchen table. No laptop. No phone. No blazer. Just Vanessa. She looked up. Ethan. I put my keys down. You're home early. She stared at me. Blackridge Holdings. I stopped. There it was. The first crack. I walked toward the refrigerator. What about it? She swallowed. Don't do that. I turned. Do what? Act like you don't know what I'm talking about. The kitchen became silent. Vanessa stood slowly. How long? I knew exactly what she meant. But I made her say it. How long what? How long have you owned part of Northstar? I looked at her. Since last year. Her face changed. Not anger. Not yet. Something much deeper. Shock. You bought into my company. Not exactly. You bought into the companies doing business with my company. Some of them. And Grant's fund. I said nothing. Her eyes widened. Oh my God. She took a step backward. You're the investor. I held her gaze. 4 layers removed. Vanessa sat down. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked completely lost. Then she whispered the question I had been waiting nearly 2 years to hear. How much money do you actually have? I didn't answer. She looked at me again. And suddenly, the woman who had once studied me like a puzzle realized something terrifying. She had never known the man she married. Not even close. Her voice became quieter. Ethan, what do you want? That question broke something inside me. Because the honest answer had nothing to do with money. I wanted the woman from that first night. I wanted the marriage I thought we had. I wanted to believe the love had been real. But you can't return to a place that never existed. I looked at Vanessa. The agreement stays. Her eyes narrowed. That's it. Your terms. Your protections. Every word. She stared at me. Then her voice cracked. You knew. I didn't respond. You knew about the exit strategy. Still nothing. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. And somehow, seeing her cry didn't make me happy. It made me remember all the nights I had sat alone wondering why I wasn't enough. I found the file, I finally said. She closed her eyes. The silence between us became unbearable. Then she whispered, You never said anything. I looked at the woman I had loved. Neither did you. She opened her eyes. And for the first time, I saw no CEO. No strategist. No carefully controlled executive. Just a woman realizing that the man she had dismissed had been watching everything. She wiped her cheek. I underestimated you. I held her gaze. Yes. She waited for me to say something cruel. I didn't. Because the truth was cruel enough. Vanessa picked up her handbag. She walked toward the door. Then stopped. Without turning around, she asked, Was any of it real? My chest tightened. That was the one question I couldn't answer. Because I still didn't know. She left. The door closed softly behind her. And I stood there alone in the kitchen. I had finally won the game she started. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like burying the last version of my life that I had hoped might somehow be saved. Then my phone rang. Daniel. Ethan, we have a problem. I looked toward the closed door. What happened? His voice became serious. Vanessa's attorney isn't fighting the agreement. I frowned. Then what's the problem? A pause. They're asking for a meeting with the board. I felt something shift inside me. Because that meant Vanessa wasn't planning to simply walk away. She was about to fight for the one thing she cared about more than our marriage. Northstar. And she had no idea that the boardroom waiting for her was no longer the boardroom she thought she owned. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. Vanessa arrived believing she was walking into a room where she still had the advantage. She didn't. Neither she nor her attorneys understood how much the ground beneath Northstar had shifted. Daniel called me before the meeting. Are you coming? I looked out at the city. No. He paused. You're serious? Completely. Vanessa will be there. I know. Her attorneys will be there too. I know. And you aren't going? I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. Let them talk. Daniel understood. That had always been the difference between us. He liked to win arguments. I preferred to let people finish talking before they realized they'd already lost. The meeting began at 9. Vanessa sat at one end of the table. Her attorney sat beside her. Several board members were connected remotely. And across the table sat Daniel. He wasn't there as my representative in a divorce dispute. He was there to explain Blackridge's position. The first hour was apparently uncomfortable. Vanessa argued that my investments were designed to create pressure against her. Her attorney questioned the legitimacy of the structures. Daniel calmly explained that every acquisition had been made through legitimate entities, properly documented, and independently funded. Then someone asked the question that changed everything. Who controls Blackridge? Silence. Daniel finally answered. Ethan Mercer. According to Daniel, Vanessa didn't speak for several seconds. Then she said, "My husband." Daniel replied, "Yes." The room went quiet, because now the board had to confront a reality Vanessa had spent years avoiding. The quiet man she'd introduced as her husband wasn't financially insignificant. He was an investor, a serious one, and some of the companies Northstar depended on were now connected to him. Vanessa demanded to know why she hadn't been informed. Daniel gave the simplest answer possible. Because Mr. Mercer wasn't required to disclose every private investment to you. That answer apparently enraged her. But anger wasn't enough. The documents were there. The ownership structures were there. The contracts were there. The money trail was there. And suddenly, the question wasn't whether I had done something wrong. The question was why Vanessa had spent years protecting herself against a man she never bothered to understand. The divorce negotiations moved quickly after that. Her original agreement was airtight regarding the assets she had listed. Her properties, her personal accounts, her declared Northstar interests. Those remained protected exactly as she had intended. But there was a problem. She had drafted the agreement based on the belief that my financial world was small. She had protected herself against the husband she thought she married. She hadn't protected herself against the husband who actually existed. Blackridge wasn't mentioned. Neither were the supplier investments. Neither was Grant's fund. And because the structures had been created independently, there was very little her attorneys could do about them. For weeks, Vanessa fought. She challenged transactions, questioned timelines, asked whether the investments were designed to interfere with Northstar. But every time her attorneys asked for evidence, Daniel produced another document, another account, another agreement, another piece of the puzzle. Eventually, even Vanessa's attorney had to accept the reality. The strategy had failed. Not because she was unintelligent. That was the part people misunderstood. Vanessa was extremely intelligent. She had simply made one catastrophic mistake. She confused silence with ignorance. By late spring, the divorce papers were ready. I signed them on a Tuesday morning. No dramatic confrontation. No shouting. No revenge speech. Just signatures. Pages turning. Pens moving. And a marriage quietly ending in a conference room. That afternoon, I moved out of the house. I didn't take much. My clothes. A few books. Some photographs. The things that were mine. I left everything Vanessa had chosen exactly where she'd left it. She had always valued efficiency. So I gave her an efficient goodbye. My new apartment was smaller than our old home, but it had an incredible view of the bay. The first night, I stood by the window with a glass of wine. And for the first time in almost 2 years, I felt something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't victory. It was silence. Real silence. The kind that comes after a storm, when you suddenly realize how loud your life had been. I thought about Vanessa. I wondered whether she was sitting in the old kitchen. Whether she was looking at the same table where she'd once placed that envelope. Whether she finally understood what she'd done. Then my phone rang. Daniel. Northstar's board wants another meeting. I closed my eyes. What now? They're worried. About Vanessa? About stability. I said nothing. They've seen the filings, Daniel continued. Blackridge's position is now public. Investors are asking questions. I looked out at the bay. Is Northstar in trouble? Not yet. Yet. Daniel sighed. Vanessa built a strong company. But the board is starting to question whether she can keep investor confidence. I didn't respond. Because I remembered the first time she'd told me about Northstar. She had been sitting across from me at dinner, talking excitedly about her vision. Back then, I had listened because I loved her. Now I was listening because I knew exactly how important that company was to her. Tell them I'm not interested in running it, I said. Daniel paused. They didn't ask you to run it. Then what do they want? Stability. I laughed softly. That's ironic. Ethan. I stopped. What? They're considering you for a formal leadership position. I stared at the phone. No. Think about it. I don't need the job. I know. Then why would I want it? Daniel's voice became quieter. Because you built companies before. You understand the industry. And because the board believes you can stabilize the relationships Vanessa damaged. I looked toward the city. For years, I had deliberately stayed out of the spotlight. I had avoided interviews, avoided public recognition, avoided having my name attached to everything I owned. But now the company Vanessa had spent years building was asking me to step into the light. And I knew exactly what that would mean. Vanessa would see my name. Not in a legal document. Not hidden behind a holding company. Not as her quiet husband. She would see it in the business section. Ethan Mercer. Chairman. I thought about the night we met. The black dress. The smile. The question about what I did. She had wanted to know who I was. I had given her the smallest possible answer. Maybe now it was time for the truth. Tell the board I'll meet them, I said. Daniel went quiet. Then he asked, Are you sure? I looked across the bay. Yes. What changed? I smiled faintly. Nothing. Nothing. I just stopped hiding. 2 weeks later, the announcement went public. The board had appointed Ethan Mercer as chairman of Northstar Freight Systems. I wasn't there when Vanessa first saw it, but Daniel called me afterward. She knows. I sat at my kitchen table. What did she say? Daniel hesitated. Nothing. That answer told me enough. Because sometimes silence isn't confidence. Sometimes it's the sound of someone finally realizing that the person they underestimated is no longer standing in their shadow. I looked down at my coffee. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. Not to Vanessa. Not to Grant. Not to the board. Not even to myself. But there was still one conversation left. Not with Vanessa's attorney. Not with the board. With Vanessa. Because after everything that had happened, I still needed to know one thing. When she first walked up to me at that reception years ago, had she ever actually loved me? Or had I been chosen from the beginning? And when she finally asked me that question herself, I realized the answer might hurt more than everything else combined. Vanessa agreed to meet me on a Sunday morning. Not at the house. Not at Northstar. She chose a small cafe near the marina, probably because it was neutral ground. I arrived early. Old habit. I ordered coffee and took the table near the window. 10 minutes later, Vanessa walked in. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked uncertain. No executive blazer. No carefully rehearsed expression. No phone in her hand. Just Vanessa. She sat across from me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, You really became chairman. I nodded. Yes. She looked down at her coffee. Northstar was my company. I know. Her eyes lifted. Was? I paused. Your company is still there. You built it, but you're running it. Not running it. Helping lead it. She gave me a faint, bitter smile. You always correct the wording. I've always cared about details. That almost made her laugh. Almost. Then her expression changed. Ethan, why? I knew exactly what she meant. Why did I invest in Northstar? She nodded. Why did you do all of it? I looked at her. The real answer? Please. I took a slow breath. Because you made me believe I meant nothing to you. Her face tightened. I continued. I could have forgiven the money. I could have forgiven the business strategy. I could have even forgiven the divorce. She looked away. But I couldn't understand why you chose me. Her eyes returned to mine. At that reception, Vanessa, I thought you liked me. I did. Did you? She hesitated. That hesitation answered more than words could. I looked down at the table. That's what I thought. She whispered. I was drawn to you. Because I was quiet? Because you were different. Different isn't the same as loved. Her eyes filled. I know. For the first time, Vanessa wasn't defending herself. She wasn't talking like a CEO. She wasn't calculating the next sentence. She was simply listening. I was under pressure, she said. Northstar was growing too quickly. Investors were watching everything. My personal life was becoming part of the conversation. I said nothing. I thought if I married someone stable, someone private, someone who didn't need attention, it would make everything easier. I stared at her. Someone like me. She nodded. Yes. That one word hurt. Even after everything, it hurt. She wiped her cheek. But I didn't expect to love you. I froze. Vanessa continued. That wasn't part of the plan. I looked away. She laughed sadly through her tears. I know how terrible that sounds. It sounds honest. And then somewhere along the way, I started caring about you. Really caring. Then why did you create the exit strategy? She closed her eyes. Because I was afraid. Of what? Losing control. I stared at her. She continued. I had spent my entire adult life making sure nobody could take anything from me. I thought love was another kind of risk. And I was the risk? At first. She looked directly into my eyes. Then you became the one person I was terrified of losing. I felt something inside me crack. Because that was the answer I had wanted for years. And somehow, hearing it now didn't fix anything. It was too late. You should have told me, I said. I know. You should have trusted me. I know. You should never have written that plan. Her tears finally fell. I know. I sat quietly. There was no revenge left in me. No anger. Just exhaustion. I had spent so long trying to prove that Vanessa had underestimated me. But sitting there I realized something. Her opinion didn't matter anymore. Neither did Grant's. Neither did the board's. Neither did anyone else's. Because the moment I stopped needing her to understand my worth, she lost the power to define it. Vanessa looked at me. Do you hate me? I thought about it. No. She looked surprised. I thought I would, I admitted. For a long time, I thought I needed you to suffer so I'd feel better. And now I just want peace. She lowered her eyes. Do you think we could ever? She didn't finish. She didn't need to. I knew. Could we ever try again? Could we rebuild? Could the two people who had destroyed their marriage somehow become strangers who chose each other again? I looked at the woman across from me. The woman in the black dress. The woman I had loved. The woman who had broken my heart. No. Her face fell. I reached across the table. Not to take her hand. Just to place my palm on the table between us. Not because I hate you. She nodded slowly. Because I finally understand something. What? You can't rebuild a marriage on top of a foundation that was never honest. She swallowed. I understand. We sat there for another few minutes. Then Vanessa stood. She picked up her handbag. Before leaving, she looked at me one last time. You really were the last person I expected. I smiled faintly. That's because you never looked closely. She nodded. I know. Then she walked away. I watched her disappear through the glass doors. And strangely, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. The divorce became final several weeks later. Northstar survived. More than survived, actually. The board eventually asked me to remain as chairman. I accepted. Not because I wanted Vanessa's company. Because I understood the business. And because I had spent years building companies of my own. Grant eventually stepped away from Northstar. His investment fund changed direction. The suppliers recovered. And Blackridge remained part of my investment portfolio. But none of those things mattered as much as people might think. Because the real victory had nothing to do with money. It happened one quiet morning months later. I was sitting alone in a cafe near the marina. No security. No assistant. No expensive watch. Just coffee. My phone buzzed. It was Marcus. Morning, he said. Morning. I saw the latest article. I smiled. What article? You know exactly what article. I laughed. Marcus paused. Then he asked, Are you okay? I looked through the window. The bay was covered in pale morning fog. I thought about the first night I met Vanessa. The wedding. The hidden file. The envelope. The long nights when I wondered whether I'd ever been loved. Then I thought about where I was now. And for the first time, the answer came easily. Yeah. Really? Really. I ended the call. Then I finished my coffee. I had spent years believing patience was about waiting for the right moment to strike. I was wrong. Patience is knowing what you deserve and refusing to destroy yourself because someone else couldn't see it. Vanessa underestimated me. But that wasn't the thing that changed my life. The thing that changed my life was realizing I didn't need to punish her for it. I didn't need to expose every secret. I didn't need to humiliate her. I didn't need her to regret losing me. I simply needed to walk away with my dignity intact. She thought she married a quiet man with little to protect. She was wrong. I had built companies. I had built wealth. I had built a life. But more importantly, I finally rebuilt myself. And sometimes the deepest revenge isn't watching someone lose everything. Sometimes it's walking away from the person who underestimated you and becoming completely fine without them. That morning I finished my coffee, looked out across the bay and smiled. Not because I had won. Because I was finally free. And for the first time in years, I didn't care who knew my name.